very much, Preston. Again, a great opportunity, great potential, very significant need for this as a mitigation, adaptation option longer term, but some definite barriers there and a need in terms of pricing signals and risk sharing and infrastructure to make it happen. So we're going to switch track a little bit now, and we've heard from two business leaders about business solutions, some policy option comments. We're now going to hear from a different sector. I'd like to get Toby Janson-Smith from Conservation International to give his sort of views about carbon capture and storage.
Thank you, James. Actually, I may not talk about carbon capture and storage, seeing as that's not my specialty, but I will talk about forest carbon, which has some things that are similar. I really just wanted to focus on three main themes. One is to talk a bit about the opportunities within the reducing emissions from deforestation space. Secondly, the importance of standards for forest carbon projects and activities. And then thirdly, to talk a bit about how we could address the permanence challenge, which is where there is the overlap between forest sequestration and geologic sequestration, or CCS projects. So in terms of reducing emissions from deforestation, I'm sure most of you are aware by now, it's increasingly policymakers and others are becoming aware it's a huge part of the problem. About 20 to 25% of all human-caused greenhouse gases come from tropical deforestation. And it's very encouraging here to see how much good discussions and progress is being made to hash out a post-2012 framework that will really cover this sector in a credible, workable way. It's got to be a big part of the solution. Probably at least a third, according to the latest McKinsey survey, of cost-effective mitigation options will have to come from forestry, and the vast majority of those from tropical deforestation, or the reducing emissions from tropical deforestation. The other unique aspect really about forestry projects, in particular tropical forestry, is the unique benefits that they can deliver. So not only would we be doing a great service to climate by addressing this sector properly, you can also deliver pretty compelling local community and biodiversity benefits that you really cannot get through any of the other mitigation or adaptation options at this point. Also, it's a key way to get developing countries to take meaningful targets and be a part of the solution through their forestry activities. We're seeing a lot of interest in the developed or Annex 1 type countries and industrialized world, as indicated by the recent US bill that's in Congress right now, where there's actually a set aside of 2.5% of all all allowances would go to mitigating, reducing emissions from deforestation in tropical countries. That may account for about $1 billion a year being allocated to that sector from the US market alone, assuming that bill goes into law. And then one last point is to remember that project-based approaches are going to be an essential part of the solution. We can't just tackle this with national level approaches. We need to think about projects that fit under that, and that's what the private sector is looking for. They want projects to invest in, and they want something tangible that they can flow their funds to. Briefly to touch on the importance of standards, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there are the key issues that really cover most project types up here: additionality, leakage, measurement and monitoring, and so forth. Permanence being the one unique one to forestry. But the others all need basically strong rules to adequately and credibly tackle them. The CDM goes part of the way, but because it only covers a small sector of forestry, just afforestation and reforestation, we need to go further. We also need to go further on the environmental and social impacts. That's where the climate, community, and biodiversity standards come in. They're the world's leading standard for certifying the multiple benefits of forestry projects, whether they be CDM or voluntary. And then we have an innovative framework that was just launched a couple of weeks ago called the Voluntary Carbon Standard, and that's providing rules for really all these other activity types in the land sector, including agriculture, improved forest management, and REDD projects. So this is a way that policymakers here can look to those sorts of frameworks as they decide how to cover these important sectors. Finally, addressing the permanence challenge. I wanted to tackle this because it's applicable both to CCS and agricultural and forestry projects. We're seeing from the CDM that its first approach of issuing temporary credits that basically have to be re-verified every 5 years or expire. That approach is not working. The private sector does not like them. It doesn't know what to do with them when they expire. There's sort of liability and risk exposure. Governments also don't like them. So we really need to look elsewhere. Unfortunately, insurance products have not come into play yet. It may be a while before those emerge. So what may point the way is actually the voluntary carbon standard approach. And that's a pooled buffer approach. And what that means is basically that every project in using that standard is risk assessed, and then based on that assessment, a percentage of all its credits are withheld in a pool that covers all the projects under the standard. And so if any single project fails, you still have enough credits to cover that failure and ensure atmospheric integrity. It's trued up over time so that you reassess project failures and adjust the percentages and the risk assessment, so there is always this atmospheric integrity. It's a workable approach. It's fairly straightforward and easy to administer. From a project perspective, it's actually quite cost effective. Really, projects, if you crunch the numbers, even with a medium risk project, you'd most likely only lose about 5 to 10% of your total discounted carbon revenue, which from the project developer perspective seems very acceptable. At least that's what we've been hearing. And finally, it's investor friendly. It's creating fungible credits for the first time that are on a par with all the credits from energy and industrial projects, which of course the market really likes. So it'll increase the depth of the credits and hopefully smooth out some price volatility. And then it eliminates any performance or impermanence liability. So it's going to be a great tool for the investment and business community, and certainly something we hope and expect that policymakers here may look at instead of replicating the failed temporary crediting scheme.
Thank you very much, Toby. Again, a pretty upbeat, positive way looking forward about how the financial market and how financial services can play a role in incentivising natural carbon capture and storage. So thanks very much. Now, great pleasure to introduce Professor Emil Salim. He is the head of the Indonesian delegation at the COP and also an advisor to the President. Thank you very much for taking the time. And I've got your presentation and we're away. Business opportunities.
Thank you very much. I bring to you the realities in the negotiations. First, the reality is that in this funding, the GF has been successful in mobilizing 7.4 billion with another 29 billion to combat projects to combat climate change. And the Kyoto Protocol is developing this clean development mechanism with around 840 registered CDM and 1,800 projects in the pipeline. It sounds impressive, but if you look then to the second page, then there is the need to combat, this is Stern report, to combat the climate change, we must at least have 1% of the world GDP. And if it is, the world is around $45 trillion, then you get the order of magnitudes that the funds that we have mobilized thus far is rather small. But more so, in the future, the developed countries must have a deeper cut. So not 5% of the 1990 level by 2012, but people are talking about 40 to 60% of the 1990 level by 2020. But why is this deeper cut so important? To enable an increased demand for capacity to absorb carbon. And that opens the way that the developing country then can promote